Welcome to Riding Counsel with Rich Jaffe, where the open road meets expert advice. I'm Richard Jaffe, an attorney and biking enthusiast, and this is the podcast where we dive into the world of motorcycling, safety, culture, charitable giving, and riding right. So, whether you're a seasoned rider or just getting started, let's talk bikes, the road, and everything in between. Let's ride! Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ridingcounsel.com podcast. How's everybody doing out there? Hope everybody's good. We got a wonderful show for you today that I'm really excited about, and it happens after you're in a motorcycle accident. So if you're in a motorcycle accident, I hope it never happens to you. There's going to be an appointment that the insurance company is going to set up for you, and I trust you. This appointment is not for your benefit. They call it an independent medical examination, but I'm going to pull the curtain back today on this. Ladies and gentlemen, there is nothing independent about this, and I quite frankly can't even call it a medical examination. So I'm going to talk about with Million what this actually is, what its purpose is, and what you can do to help yourself after an accident and the insurance company sends you to one of these independent, supposedly, medical examinations. So with that, let me say hello to my friend Million. How you doing, Million?
Well, hello. Hope everybody out there is doing well. It's going to be an interesting topic today because I was on the same accord as you were in the terms of independent. I thought to myself, wait, an insurance company is actually paying for this. It's not really independent now, is it? Right. So it's interesting how these names and these titles come up for these things.
Yeah, they'll do anything, really. I mean, it's a big insurance company, and they're very good at what they do, meaning they like to brainwash people's minds, okay? Because every accident is fraud, but in the meantime, they can hide videotapes or evidence, and that's not fraud. I mean, everyone says, okay, well, when I'm selecting a jury, I sit there and I look out at the jury panel, usually about 25 people, 30 people maybe, and I ask them, I said, with a show of hands, how many people here believe that there are fraudulent cases in the system? Okay, people are making up fraudulent accidents, and everybody raises their hand. Oh yeah, definitely, there's fraud out there. But then I ask an even more interesting question, which is, how many people think that there are frivolous defenses out there? And people think a minute, they're like, yeah, I think I do realize that the fact that there is actually something on the other side. So, the insurance company made this misnomer of calling this stuff an independent medical examination, or an IME. And I don't call it that. If they want to use IME for initials, I call it an insurance medical examination. Mm-hmm. So really, you got to call it for what it is. And there's been a couple of decisions out there from judges calling it what it is, but it's going to affect you, and you better be prepared. After you're in an accident and you're hurt, and you really are hurt. The insurance company is not going to believe you, because that's their job, and they're going to hire doctors to say that you're not hurt, because not only is it their job, but it's the doctor's job. So nothing really is independent about it.
All right, so let's take it from the top. So we've already determined the independent part. Now, the medical examination, it's, when I think of medicine, it's like, you're going to get a treatment or a medication prescription, something like that, but you're not getting that here. You're just basically getting scrutinized, and then a report is being made. But from the top, from listeners that have never dealt with this before, when does the IME enter the picture? Where does this come in the first place?
Right. So when you're in an accident, motorcycle accident, car accident, whatever have you, you have these injuries that you're claiming, and you're going to send your medical records in, along with some authorizations for the insurance company and defense counsel, if they're involved, to get the medical records to say, look, we want to verify this stuff and we want to check it out. So let me see what the medical records say. So you have to give all that up. But then they have the right to call their own doctor at trial to say you're not hurt, basically. And in order for that doctor to do that, they have to examine you. So it's after you've claimed all the injuries that you're going to claim, and you're in the process of litigation, they can have what's known as this independent or insurance examination. I prefer to call it a defense physical, but they have the right to take a look at you by a doctor of their choosing, who they pay. So that's where it comes in the process. So it's usually probably at least a year goes by before they actually send you to one of these doctors. But they try to skid around the issue too, because what they do is the insurance company says, no, no, we don't hire the doctors directly. We hire agencies who then pick the doctor. But guess what? The money still goes to the doctor from the insurance company. So that's really all a scam too. So it's just game after game with the insurance company.
So the ultimate goal here, whenever we're talking insurance, is they're trying to not pay you, basically. So these IMEs that come along are to either approve or deny benefits, mostly deny, or reduce settlements, or just I don't want to say create a chaos, but I guess create more of that uncertainty, muddy the water. So, what is the ultimate? Did I miss anything? Is that the ultimate goal of what they're after here?
Thereafter they say they just want to evaluate you and your injuries and how your injuries have affected you. But quite the opposite, because they're never to admit that there's actually an injury. I mean, I've had people walk in, literally, they've had fractured skulls, and the doctor says, "Yeah, you're fine. Take care. See you later, and you're gonna be fine." I've had people who have had operations, for things that they've been in hospital for a long time, and the only way they got out was because they had this operation, and the doctor's sitting there saying that the operation wasn't really necessary. He didn't need that operation. So, yeah, it happens all the time. This is what they're paid for. I mean, there are honest doctors out there that really try to be independent, but guess what? They give a positive report that says, look, this plaintiff is actually really injured. And how many more cases do you think that doctor's getting? And the answer is slim to none. Slim just left the building.
So when you go to your standard doctor visit, you have a certain level of care and treatment. When you go to one of these IME exams, how is it different from going to your physician? What would people expect when they literally go there?
When you go to one of these defense physicals, there's really not doctor patient relationship, and this doctor is not there to really treat you, and the doctor is not really concerned about getting you better. The doctor is only there to evaluate you, and that's it, and render a report, and that report is going to be skewed because that's what the insurance company wants. And usually these doctors want to keep the business of the insurance company. So whereas you would go to a doctor after your injuries from a motorcycle accident to get better, whether that be for therapy or some sort of examination, and the doctor says, okay, well, let me prescribe you some medicine or some sort of course of treatment, let me refer you out to a specialist. This defense physical doctor does none of that. All this defense physical doctor does is take a look at you, take a look at some x-rays if they're available, maybe some MRIs, and says, this guy ain't hurt. So yeah, they're not really out there for your benefit at all.
So like with the MRIs, do they like refer you for MRIs and things like that? Or are they only looking at what's existing? Like, can they request more tests and things?
Well, the funny thing is that a lot of times if you go to an orthopedist for a defense physical, that orthopedist usually isn't given a set of full records by defense counsel. So they're looking at you and saying you're not hurt, but they really don't have the big picture. So a lot of times they don't have x-rays. A lot of times they don't have MRIs or CAT scans. They do have the right to ask defense counsel for these things. And if you're asking me, it makes sense that any doctor would be more accurate if they have more information about your injury. But they just don't ask for it. They don't ask for CAT scans. They don't ask for MRIs. Everybody's just lazy because everybody knows the ultimate conclusion is this doctor is going to say you're not hurt. Doesn't matter how you can have 50 MRIs, so the same body part. They're still going to say that you're not hurt. So they can look at the MRIs if they're available. You can get a radiologist to do that, or some sort of neuroradiologist. You can get a doctor can look at x-rays and see if you're hurt or not hurt, but a lot of times they're so lazy that they don't even do that.
So under all circumstances, is it fair to say that like if you're a rider that's hurt in an accident, this is a pretty big red flag when this comes up?
Listen, 100%. Okay. And there are ways that you can protect yourself when you go in for one of these defense physicals. Now, understand the defense physical has begun even before you go to the office. Okay. Because they're looking at your medical records, your hospital records, they're looking at your work history, they're looking at all this stuff. And a lot of times these doctors know the answers to the questions, but they ask it because they want to see if you're telling the truth or not. So you really got to be careful. And as far as what I do at ridingcounsel.com, I talk to my clients and I go through all the steps, and I also email my clients with all kinds of information, and I set up videos for them with all kinds of information to help them through the defense physical process, because it's very hard to get out of there and not hurt your own case because you get nervous. And of course, this is your first time. So you really have to be careful what you're doing and talk to your lawyer once you get these notices. So, anybody out there, any of my clients listening to this, you can always get me. You know how to get me. Um, if you're not a client, please, you can always subscribe, like, and share on this podcast. Okay. Ridingcounsel.com, RIDINGCOUNSEL. You can call me. You can go to my website at ridingcounsel.com. You can text me. You can email me anything you want, and I'm more than happy to help you.
Are there any patterns or triggers that starts this process? Like, is it if they ask for a certain amount? Is it certain injuries that tend to get this more? Like, what sort of kicks this into motion? Is it anything or is it something specific?
Well, really, it's if you're making a claim for injuries that you've sustained as a result of an accident. So that could be a motorcycle accident, trip and fall, car accident, anything of the sort. So if your pre-claim, meaning a summons and complaint has not been filed, at least in New York, then you're not going to get noticed for this defense physical. There are other kinds of physicals that you might be required to go to. But as far as a defense physical, you're not going to be required to go to one unless a summons and complaint is filed. After a summons and complaint is filed, then you go through the litigation process and discovery. So when you're in discovery, one of the things that defense is entitled to in that discovery process is the fact that they could send you to one of the doctors. So you really have to be in litigation.
Okay. And then once we have something, how much weight do these realistically carry in? Because we're going to try to get to a settlement before going to a full trial in many cases. So, how much weight does this carry in this process?
You know, Frankly, I don't pay it any attention unless you get a positive finding, which would be fantastic because that would boost up the findings or boost up the value of the claimant's injuries. But it's really more for trial. And then when these doctors appear for trial, that's when you give a right to cross-examine them. And you can bring up points of the fact that, okay, you're basing your opinion on one examination, and the point of your examination is not to treat the client. And also, you were paid by the insurance company, and that you see 200 of these types of clients a month, and this is how much you earn. And so it's all about cross-examination and trying to bring to light what this doctor really is about. That's why I love it when they call them independent medical examinations, because I'm right there saying this isn't really independent at all. So, in when it comes to me and my firm with a lot of experience, you know what to expect. And the insurance companies, these adjusters, a lot of them are realists, and they say, okay, yeah, this medical examination really isn't the truth, but they'll kind of be realists and say maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. But then you get the Kool-Aid drinkers who, on the defense side, they'll just stick by it and say your client's not injured and I have the report to prove it. So, it depends upon a lot of factors, but generally speaking, these independent medical examinations, which aren't really independent at all, don't carry much weight.
Okay. But they're more of a trial thing then.
Yeah, if you're on trial, that's when it really comes into play.
Okay.
So, I mean, the injury really speaks for itself most of the time.
Got it.
If somebody doesn't go for treatment, then they're probably not hurt. I mean, that's the logic. But if they do go for treatment and they start getting more serious above conservative modalities for treatment, meaning something more than like physical therapy or acupuncture, then, usually people don't do that unless they're hurt. So if they're going in for an operation, these people that go in for an operation, they have to sign a consent form that says, look, these are the risks of the procedure that you're going in for. So don't do it if you're not hurt. Okay. Because one of them is death. One of them is like you're going to wake up and you're not going to be able to move your arm or your leg forever, or you could wake up brain dead. I mean, these are serious things. So if you're not in pain, I don't think anybody's going to risk that. But if you are in pain and you'll do anything to get out of it, that's when you're going to do the surgery. So,
Got
you
it.
really do have to examine the records.
I would imagine that being a little unscrupulous as they may be, that as this uh, like the treatment, like the regular medical treatment a person is going through, as that goes on, they probably slow walk it how laid out they schedule these, because they want to give you a chance to heal up, maybe to make a better case that there's nothing wrong with you. How much like does time play a role in this?
Well, listen, that comes into play certainly with scars, right? Because if somebody is like burned, let's say, or they have this horrible laceration, it looks really bad in the beginning. Um, you can show very gory pictures, especially with children. If they get scarred or they get bitten by a dog, really leaves some nasty marks. And truth be told, some of these things actually heal up and you look fine, but other times they'll last forever. So, you got to talk to the treating doctors and say, "Doc, it looks really bad in the pictures. When can we expect this to get better?" The doctor might say it'll take a year. Some doctors will say maybe 2 or 3 months. Some doctors will give you another time, or some doctors will say it's never going to get better. This is the best it can be. But again, insurance companies don't want to examine you a month after like a scar because they know it's going to get better. And they won't settle a case a month after a scar because they know it's going to get better. So, yeah, all that timing really does come into play.
How do they treat previous medical history? Do they try to factor that in somewhere?
Oh, of course. So, there's a big difference between something known as being predisposed to a future injury and a pre-existing injury. And all the time I see this with neck and back. They'll say, "Okay, well, I somebody will be in an accident this year, 2025." And they'll say, "I hurt my neck and I hurt my back, but I last hurt it in 2020." And they treated for it in 2020 and they stopped treating because it felt better. But now they re-injured their back. And the insurance company's position is, look, this was all pre-existing. He had this injury before. It's really not a result of this accident. That's one of their big arguments. But you have to get the insurance company to understand and juries to understand that pre-existing is very different than predisposed. Predisposed injury means that you are more susceptible to getting an injury in your neck or your back if you've injured those parts before because those parts have been weakened. And when you're in an accident, at least in New York, you have to take the plaintiff as you find them. It's called the eggshell skull theory. So if you drop a rock and you drop an egg, and from that same height, that egg is going to break, and the rock is probably not going to break. But you have to take the plaintiff as you find him or her. So while the rock didn't break, and therefore you can't sue, the egg certainly broke, and you can sue because that's just the way the egg is built. It's much more fragile. Same thing with predisposition to a future injury. Once you have an injury in the past, it predisposes you, it makes you more fragile and more susceptible to an injury in the future. It's going to take a lot less for you to get injured.
Got it. So you go into this defense physical, as you call it. I would assume generally people want to be helpful. They want to help their case, but much like, speaking to police, if you're pulled over, you kind of want to shut up a little bit. And so when you go into these exams, what is the proper way to conduct yourself? Like, are you trying, some people will be maybe overly polite or maybe clam up and not say much or one word answers. What's the proper way to conduct yourself and protect yourself as you're going through this?
Well, you have to understand, like I said, every defense physical is actually begun before you even walk in that office. And when you do come to the office, they're going to watch you. They have videotape everywhere, though they won't admit it, but they do have videotape everywhere. So they're going to watch you in the parking lot, how you get into the office. They're going to watch you in the waiting room. They're going to have video. They're going to see, do you sit down okay? Do you stand up okay? And then they're going to call you into the waiting room and they're going to see how you walk down the hall to the waiting room. And there's videotape there. The doctor's going to say, "Hi, come on in. Please have a seat." And so they're going to see if you sit down okay. And then they're going to say, "Okay, no, I don't want you to sit there. Can you just move and go sit in the other chair?" And you're going to get up and you're going to get down. And if there's no delay in getting up or down, or you don't wince in pain or something like that, they know you can get up and down. So when they ask you, "Okay, well, do you have any problems with your back or your neck?" And you say, "Oh, yeah, I can't sit in the chair. I can't get up from a chair." "Oh, really? Because I have you on videotape doing that." Okay, so you really have to be careful and watch yourself. The best thing that you can do is be honest. Do not exaggerate, but at the same time, don't play it down. If you're hurt and the doctor says, like, "Look, I'm going to touch you and I'm going to examine you in certain places," and you don't say, "Ouch, doctor, that hurts," the doctor's not going to write it down and say it hurts. if you have pain, you must verbalize it to the doctor who's examining you. And the best way to connect with a doctor is just to be honest and answer the questions. Don't elaborate, but also at the same time, don't try to avoid it. Don't be shifty because the doctor is going to make note of all of that. And you don't want to do that.
When you're dealing with injuries that are subjective versus objective, you like you said earlier, you burn, you get a scar, it's pretty obvious, but you can't really judge someone else's pain. So how does that factor in? Is it easier to defend? Is it easier to work with? Is it give you more problems in these exams? Subjective or subjective, what are we thinking?
Well, that brings up a really good point. Okay. Everybody has a different pain tolerance, and pain affects people different ways, different people, different ways. If you're older, if you're younger, and depending upon what you do or what you have to do, it's just like somebody who plays the trumpet has a fractured pinky versus somebody who doesn't really need their pinky to do any work or do anything during their day. That's a fractured pinky, same injury, same pain. But for the guy who's playing the trumpet, that's he's not going to be able to work anymore. He's not going to be able to play his trumpet. But somebody else who doesn't really need that pinky very well, it's really not going to be affect them as much. But it all comes down to what the accident really affects you like. In other words, is it the journey that's more important for you, or is it the destination that's more important to you? And this is the things that I try to explain to the jury. The insurance company is going to stand up there with their lawyers and say he was able to work, so he couldn't have been hurt. And I'm going to stand up there and say, yeah, he went to work. Okay. But before he even got to work, he had to load up on 4 aspirin. He had to take a really hot shower. He had to get a massage, all these things in order to get to work. And then while he's at work, he wasn't able to sit for long periods of time. So he had to stand up, he had to sit down, he had to stretch, he had to take a longer lunch, all these things that this person had to do because of his pain. And yeah, he finished the day. And when he got home, he had to go right to sleep. That is the journey. Okay. The destination was, yeah, he got to work. But what's more important, getting to the destination or the journey that it took? So you really have to be able to explain these things to the jury.
Something you said earlier, which was kind of sticking in my mind a little about being under surveillance from the parking lot, the waiting room, etc. When insurance companies are conducting other surveillance, they maybe hire a PI to make sure you're not like, bricklaying or something like that with an
Yeah.
injury.
Yeah.
How do they factor in like that kind of stuff, like external surveillance, not part of this IME? And does it kind of like, I assume they all work it together for their own good is my assumption.
Oh, listen, 100%. If you're in the public, they can videotape you. If you can be seen from the sidewalk or somewhere public, they can videotape you and they can get you on these things. Okay. So I had somebody who played soccer and was in this particular league, and he came to me and he said, look, I was in an accident and, I have this concussion and, my neck hurts, my back hurts. The very next week, I get a videotape of the guy playing soccer. Of course, I dropped his case because he's just lying. But the same kind of thing with these defense physicals. They're going to videotape you. I had somebody show up the other day to a defense physical, and the doctor who was conducting it was wearing the new cool meta glasses, and it had a camera on it. So, you think like you wouldn't know, but my client caught it. He was smart enough to catch it and say, please let's, discontinue this until such time as you take off your ridiculous meta glasses because this is just not happening. But they try anything. They'll try to videotape it like that. They'll try to trick you one way or the other. They'll say your shoe is untied and have you bend down and tie your shoe. All kinds of tricks that they're able to do.
When it comes to motorcycles, they often are sort of judged a certain way when it comes to injuries and things like that. How do they treat motorcycle situations? They like, oh, it's a lifestyle thing as opposed to like a real trauma or injury. What's the general consensus in that realm?
Well, certainly doctors are going to realize that motorcyclists love riding motorcycles. And one of their questions is like, have you been back on a motorcycle? So be prepared for that question. Talk to your lawyer about how to answer that question. Maybe it's not really relevant to your examination. So maybe your lawyer is going to say, don't even answer that. So, they can try to conduct it. These doctors can try to conduct it like a deposition. But a lot of times motorcyclists, bikers, if you will, they like to try to be macho and they say, "Oh, I'm okay. I'm going to be fine." And that plays right into the doctor's hands. And the doctor will just write, "Okay, you're fine," and end the examination. Or the doctor will try to be pretty slick on things like, "Hi, how's everything? How you feeling today?" And very casually, you'll say, "I'm fine, doctor. How are you?" And he'll say, "Okay, doc, he said he's totally fine, no pain." And that's the end of the examination. So you really got to be careful about, like, what you're doing, and also present yourself to the doctor not dressed in biker clothes. That's one thing not to do, because you want to make a good impression on the doctor that you're not some sort of skell. But also, the doctor's going to look at other things. Okay, so if you're into motorcycles, most of us work on our motorcycles in our garages. So if you show up to an examination of one of these defense doctors and he sees your hands and they're all dirty from grease and grime and whatever, maybe they have cuts on them and stuff like that, and it looks like you're working, well, guess what? The doctor's going to make note of it. He's probably going to take pictures of it, and he's going to say, "Hey, you've been working on your bike, and because I see the evidence, and so that's not going to put you in a very nice position either." So you got to be careful and just use your common sense in this stuff.
So it seems like at these exams, they're going to go for attacking credibility as opposed to the actual medical situation, because I guess they're looking for this. And I guess my next question from there would be, much like you were saying, it's something of a deposition. It's kind of is, but not. What are you? I guess if you're asked a question that you don't want to answer or you're not supposed to answer, like how do you handle that? Because if by not wanting to answer, maybe you arouse suspicion. It's like the traffic stop. I'm not answering questions today.
Right.
So how do you
Right.
handle that?
So a lot of doctors try a lot of different things. A lot of times, what they'll do is, when you go to these defense exams, they'll hand you a packet of papers that'll take you like 45 minutes, an hour to fill out, about all your medical history, how the accident happened, all the damage to the car, all this other kind of crazy stuff. Other doctors will ask you those kinds of questions when they're examining you, fully knowing that a lot of the questions that they ask you, they're really not entitled to that information. And the insurance companies kind of prep the doctors and say, "Listen, try to get this stuff." And doctors also have an axe to grind with people like me who cross-examine them when they come to court. So they like to take that out on the clients and try to be mean to the clients. They'll examine them a certain way to try to hurt them. I've had that happen all the time. And make it as unpleasant as possible for the patient, which is my client. In order to protect against this stuff, well, I either send somebody from my office, or I have a separate company that I use, and I hire somebody to go with the patient to protect them.
No.
These people are essentially guardians of the clients while they're doing this defense physical, so they know what could be filled out, what not to fill out, what to say, what not to say, and they'll stop the doctor in his or her tracks. And if the doctor keeps pushing it, then we end the exam.
Wow. So going into one of these exams, in addition to having the guardian there with them, is there any other documentation or preparation that will protect them going into this?
Well, what you can do. The answer to the question is documentation, probably not. Preparation, there's a lot of preparation, and you should talk to your lawyer about it, because, like I said, I give my clients at writingcounsel.com a lot of information on how to approach this thing. You can also do some really protective things, like immediately after this defense physical, you can have your own doctor waiting, and you could be examined by your own doctor, who will find what you really hurt, what really hurts on you, do measurements of your movements that will totally contradict what the defense doctor just said. So, that's also some documentation that you can do. And also, you can also make a recording. You can write down on paper, "This is when I got to the waiting room. This is how long I waited. This is how long the exam happened. And this is when I left." And, when the doctor says, "I examined this guy for an hour," you say, "No, you didn't. You examined me for basically 2 minutes. And I know this because I recorded it. And there's no way this doctor is going to realize that, you did that, number one. And number two is, the doctor's not going to remember, because this insurance doctor has about 50 examinations doing the same thing for 50 different people, in one particular day." So, you can really bolster your arguments using that kind of technique.
Okay, so we've gone through all this. We've talked about the parameters, this and that. And now the question that I generally like to ask you is that if you can remember just one kind of golden rule going into this as the person injured, what do we need to know? The biggest thing.
Well, the doctor is not your friend, and
Mhm.
the doctor is not your
Adversarial right from the start.
the doctor is not your friend. That doesn't mean you have to fight with the doctor,
Right.
but it doesn't mean that you have to help the doctor. So the doctor is not your friend. The only friend that you have is your law firm and the guardian that's in there with you. But that's probably a good place to end because I didn't even realize how long we're talking here because I could talk about this stuff forever.
Yep.
But if you do want to know more, drop me a comment, put some comments in there. I always answer comments, telephone calls, anything you want. I really want people to be informed out there. And, check me out, check all the other episodes out. Do me a favor, like, subscribe, share. I really would appreciate it. It helps me out more than you know. And you can always find me online at ridingcounsel.com, RIDINGCOUNSEL.com. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Insta. You can find me on X and wherever else. But, we're coming to you pretty much once a week, sometimes more. And I really appreciate everybody listening out there. And I hope everybody's safe. I want everybody to stay wild, ride free, but, do so legally. All right, everybody. You take care out there.
All right. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Riding Counsel with Richard Jaffe. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your fellow riders. Until next time, keep the rubber side down and ride safe.